In this lecture, we're going to fix the issue with our fonts. Our theme utilizes two fonts called Pacifico and Rubik. On our site, the Rubik font gets applied perfectly. However, the same can't be said for the Pacifico font. The site logo does not match the logo on the static design. So, what's the big deal? To understand the issue, we need to search for the font in the document. Open the Developer Tools. Under the Elements panel, search for the font link. WordPress will assign an ID to the CSS files linked in your document. The ID will match the first value passed into the WP register style function. In our case, the value was the following: U, font, Rubik, and Pacifico. The font family gets linked in the document. Doesn't seem like an issue. However, look closely at the URL. It's completely different from the URL in the WP register style function. For comparison, here are the URLs side by side. WordPress has modified the original URL. During the registration process, WordPress will add a query parameter called version to the URL. I've highlighted this portion of the URL in red. That begs the question, what is a query parameter? A URL query parameter refers to a value added to a URL. We have different ways of sending additional data to a server. A standard solution is to add a query parameter to a URL. In the URL, we can add a query parameter by adding a question mark character at the end of the URL. Afterward, we can start adding key value pairs. Multiple key value pairs can be added by separating them with an ampersand symbol. Query parameters are incredibly beneficial for sending data from the browser to the server. Normally, data must be sent via a form. However, query parameters allow us to send data in the URL without submitting a form. There are some limitations. We can't send file data. We're limited to sending strings. Keep that in mind when working with query parameters. Back to our example. WordPress will add the version query parameter for specifying the version of the file. By default, the version will be set to the current version of WordPress installed on the site. If you have version 5.9 installed, the value will be 5.9. During this process, WordPress will filter the query parameters that exist in the URL. Unfortunately, this affects our styles. Look closely at the original URL. I've highlighted a key portion of the URL in red. There is a duplicate query parameter called family in the URL. WordPress will remove duplicate parameters. For this reason, both fonts aren't loaded. Only one font works. To fix our site, we need to prevent the version query parameter from being added to the URL. By doing so, WordPress will not filter the other query parameters. Therefore, we will be able to add duplicate query parameters to the URL. In your editor, open the enqueue.php file. We are going to modify the first WP register style function. The fourth argument of the WP register style function allows us to specify a version. Before adding it, we need to add the third argument. Unfortunately, PHP does not allow us to modify the fourth argument without specifying the third one. The third argument of the WP register style function is a list of dependencies. As we've learned in an earlier lecture, we can provide a list of files that should be loaded before this file. For example, we can pass in an empty array. The fourth argument is what we care about. We can pass in a string to set a custom version. For example, we can set the version to 1.0. The original goal was to remove the version parameter from being added. Instead of passing in a string, we can set the fourth argument to null. This is our first time using the null data type. We talked about data types in an old lecture. The null data type is a value that represents nothing. We're telling our program that nothing should be stored. WordPress will interpret this as us wanting to disable the version query parameter. With those changes set, let's refresh the page. The site title has the correct font. Perfect. Let's check out the link tag for the Google font. The URL remains unmodified. The version query parameter never gets applied. Therefore, the other query parameters remain unaffected. We've successfully fixed our issue.